Hello, everyone. How are you guys today? Hopefully you're doing well. I'm Elizabeth Corey. I am the founder of BeatingTrauma.com, and I'm here for a live stream today. But I've been traveling the last 4 or 5 days, and so I have done absolutely no preparation for this live stream whatsoever. It's been a really long time since we've had a question and answer session. And so I didn't want to not show up today, but I am going to be relying heavily upon you guys to ask me questions and keep this going because I did not put together an outline. Hi, Carol. Excuse me. And Carol and Jan can be the perfect people to come in and ask me questions. Sorry to put you on the spot. If you don't have them, that's fine. Because today's going to be a Q&A, and I have not done a Q&A in a really long time. And I wanted to do that today because life's been a little crazy the last few days. I didn't get in on the plane until last night at like 11:30. So I have zero things prepared, and I'm willing to admit it. I want to say hi to Carol and Jan and Shabnam. Thank you guys for being here. Again, please feel free to ask me a question. Anything can be about any topic. I mean, preferably something related to trauma healing. But I'll really answer almost anything. Doesn't really matter. So this is the day for that today. I think it's probably been a year since I've done a Q&A session. So this is going to be what we do today. I am moving in here, as you can see, super unprepared. Okay, Carol has a great opening question. Thank you, Carol. I will also say that the first question does have a tendency to set the stage because then everybody starts asking questions about that question. But if you have other questions about other things, feel free to ask them as well. This is open. This is on all topics, generally related to trauma recovery. Carol is saying, how do I know my decision is an intuitive one? That is an excellent question and, a complex question, which I would expect because, well, there aren't very many easy trauma recovery questions, are there? But this can be a tough one. And I'll be honest, there are times when I'm still trying to figure out if that's my intuition or if that's a part. So I will give you just the gist of what I use for myself and certainly also to help my clients around whether or not a decision is intuitive or a decision may be coming from an inner part and be somewhat ungrounded. Because what Carol may be sort of hinting here is that maybe she's experienced times when a part's desire or need seemed really grounded and intuitive, because they can do that, and they do that. And some of them, especially Karma Kid, can be pretty tricky about it. It can be convincing. So when you have an urge to make a decision or an urge to take an action, the first thing I always recommend to everybody is that you pause, okay? Always and forever. The art of the pause has been one of the best things I have discovered about the healing journey. Being able to do that for myself has saved me from many bad scenarios in my life. Is really being able to pause has helped me a lot. So that is always step number one, because when we put some space between the urge and the action, that is one of the best things we could do in life in general. I really, really love the pause. It's just what we need. And the reason we need it so much is that we aren't always very connected to ourselves. We aren't really sure what we want on a very grounded, heart-centered level. It can be very hard to determine what we want. So when we pause and when we take the urgency out of the situation, it then allows us to see this particular urge or desire for what it is. And one of the things I will say is oftentimes when a decision is intuitive, there isn't an urgency to it, okay? If a decision is coming from a part and it isn't fully grounded, it will come with urgency. Sometimes it will come with desperation, okay? That's another word I use. It's like your intuitive decisions are never desperate, and they will never push you to act right this very second or else, right? It's like, think about that used car person who's like, oh, if you don't take this deal now, it's never going to happen again. If you're hearing that, it's not intuitive, okay? So like, I want to be really clear about that, because that is a very common thing that we get with urges from parts. So when you pause, it lets you see that urgency or desperation much more clearly. Because when you pause, they will often, if it is coming from a part, that the urgency and desperation will often get more intense. And they may even start kind of getting mad or yelling about it or saying, oh my God, if you don't do this now, right? Like that used car salesman thing. If you don't do this now, oh my God, end of the world will show up for you if you don't do this thing now. So that, those messages of urgency and desperation often show up when we pause. So with the pause, we want to try to connect with anything that says you must act now. So writing from that message, you must act now. This is urgent. Do it now, or else. That's a big place to focus our writing once we have paused. But there's many other places we can focus the writing. We can focus the writing on just kind of a round table, around what I like to call a round table, around that particular decision. Parts that want to do it, parts that don't want to do it. Grounded adult self stepping forward. Let sort of the resistance to the idea and, those aspects that are in support of that idea right. So that's what we can do in the pause. And that will often help us know if something is intuitive for us. I will also say that most of the time our intuitive decisions do get a lot of backlash in our system and can sound almost crazy. Like we will often call ourselves crazy. The controller will say, that's crazy, that's irresponsible, that's dumb, that's a bad idea. Those are often intuitive in nature. So just because you're hearing a strong backlash to an idea doesn't make it wrong. Sometimes it's the most right. And we don't often hear that in this world. We hear a lot of, if it's meant to be, it'll be easy. No, that is definitely not true. Intuitive ideas come with a tremendous amount of resistance. So something else to keep in mind. So those are some suggestions on knowing if something is intuitive. I get caught on this one a lot, but those are things that maybe can help you with that. So Jan is saying, while I'm working on healing my trauma, I am witnessing some generational defenses, and it is painful, upsetting to be an observer, especially as it affects my grandchildren. I feel powerless, tough place to be. Any suggestions? So when you talk about generational defenses, are these things you're seeing in yourself that you don't really want to be there because they're things from your family, or you're seeing them in your own kids or in like the next generation who is parenting your grandkids? I'm going to assume you're referring to seeing it in that next generation as they parent your grandkids, but you could tell me, okay, you're saying family. So this is painful. And the reason why it's painful is because there is not very much we can do about it. What I will say is the best thing that you can do about it, especially when the pain is coming up and it's raw and it feels really awful, is to let it right, because more than likely, while you may be seeing it in that next generation, you also saw it in the generation that raised you, and so it can be highly triggering. So we want to connect with that emotional response to what they're doing and let it right. I'll be honest, it may be bringing up quite a bit of rage. It may also be bringing up quite a bit of futility. It's like, oh, what's the point? If no matter how much work I do, they're just going to repeat the patterns, right? Or it's never going to go away. I'm never going to get anywhere with this. Why bother? That is a big kind of trigger response we can have. On the other side of it, it's the anger, because it happened to us and we don't want to see it happening to anybody else. So letting yourself right from those, what I tend to find is that as we process the emotions from how those particular defenses impacted us, it does give us a little bit more grounded wisdom about how to address it now. In many ways, releasing ourselves from that generational trauma pattern will really, if we're still interacting with people in the family, it will invite them to come to the table, because our behavior will start to shift. Now, it may also invite them to get very upset because we're not playing our role anymore, but it does allow them to consider the possibility of looking at things differently. I find that works way better than engaging them in more intellectual conversations about what's right for the next generation and what isn't. Those tend to not go as well. A lot of times, especially if it's like grandparent talking to our child about how to parent their child, those tend to kind of fall flat. They don't really go too far. And so the best thing we can do, process the emotional impact it's having on us, and then change our behavior in a way that it's like almost like planting a seed with them. It's like if you're behaving differently with them, then they have the opportunity to learn from that. Now, again, I'm not here to say that they're going to do that, but I am here to say that you're giving them that opportunity. This is a tough one, and I know it is. But yeah, these are those moments when we don't really have too much control, and it feels awful, especially when we've lived our lives largely not in control. So that's what I have to say on that. Thank you for your question. And before I move on to the next question, I just want to say that we are doing a Q&A session today. So if you have a question about anything at all, please ask. Again, mostly trauma recovery, but I can answer other things too, maybe. Feel free to ask. Today is Q&A, so we do not have a set topic. I am just answering questions. Again, haven't done a Q&A in like a year, maybe more. I'm not actually sure. So this is good timing since I flew in late last night and didn't have time to write an outline for a topic for today. Shabnam is saying, sometimes I feel that the decision I make is not taking me to purpose, i.e. intuition, but more just getting away from abuse. So it feels like I don't have a choice if I don't want more harm. Yeah, so this is a really good point, and it kind of plays on what Carol was talking about from an intuition perspective. So what I will say is intuition doesn't tend to be available to us when we are feeling like really intense fear in our current life. So when our situation today is abusive, okay, it's going to be very hard to feel safe enough to really access intuition. Especially what I was talking about earlier, where it's like crazy intuition, where like your controller is screaming at you, what are you doing? This is nuts. That stuff doesn't really have the opportunity to present itself if we are still in danger, so we're not safe, right? So honestly, one of the most important decisions that we can make for ourselves in our healing journey is to get ourselves to a place where we are safe. And sometimes removing ourselves from unsafe environments is actually intuitive. It's just it's more of the you've got to create safety intuitive than the hey, let's go do this crazy new thing intuitive, but it's still a very important decision. So those intuitive decisions come in layers, right? Excuse me. And so that's what you're dealing with there. So it is a highly important decision. And establishing safety is critical. But yeah, it isn't what I was talking about earlier, where it's like your controller is having a meltdown because you've decided to, I don't know, move to the other side of the world and braid hair for a living. I don't know. But intuitive decisions do often sound a little nutty once we have established safety. Before we've established safety, yes, your controller will still say that's a bad and irresponsible decision, because the controller isn't interested in establishing safety if it is at the expense of, let's say, financial security, right? They will always choose financial security over true safety. And so while it is an intuitive decision and there is often a strong controller resistance to it, it is probably a stepping stone to future intuitive decisions. So, all right, let's see. What is Carol saying? She's saying, why does futility come in so strong after grieving? That's a really good question. I will say that futility is a strong defense in our system. There's, a few things that I would call defensive in regards to our emotional state. One is going to be that controller fear. So controller fear comes on as a defense. It's often the first defense, but not always, where we will be dissociated because of that controller fear. We will be numbed out. We will be pretty much not in touch with almost anything. And to be fair, we don't even realize that there's an emotional component to that particular defense. It's just, but underneath it, there's fear. It can sound very logical, right? With the controller in charge. But it is actually highly fear-based. So that's the first defense. The second defense is anger. Anger is a defense. However, anger is more of a protective defense. In other words, it's showing up because something is happening in our lives that is reminding us or is also impacting us as a potential safety issue. So usually when anger comes up, our boundaries are being invaded in some way that does not feel safe. Now, to be fair, sometimes our boundaries are being invaded and that is triggering past unsafe boundary invasions, but this particular one isn't on that level yet. It's very hard to see that. And so that anger can get triggered forward and really just come on strong. So that is another defense. The third defense is going to be futility. So futility is a defense, right? And that defense says, what's the point? Why bother? Give up. Nothing's ever going to get any better, right? It is the basis for depression, okay? And it is a defense against grieving. It's also a defense against other things, but it is a defense against grieving. Whereas anger and grieving more they go together a little bit. So if you're finding futility is coming up after you grieve, what I would say is that grief has opened up your understanding to something new. Like there's a new awareness that's trying to come in because of that grief. And that awareness, again, could be a memory. It also could be leading you towards some anger, because like I said, anger and grief, they can kind of go back and forth with each other. So the futility coming from the Karma Kid is going to be not okay with anger and grief, generally speaking. Futility will try to block both of those things. So, but what I would say, and maybe this is something you can kind of tell yourself as you're going through that, is that when futility comes up, there is something on the other side of it that's very important. Again, we don't always know what that's going to be until we get there. But what I try to tell myself when I'm feeling strong, depressive, hopeless energy is that as I process through that, which I do by writing from it, that whatever is on the other side of it is important. And the Karma Kid is very scared of it because it is important. So let yourself keep working with that until you get at what the futility is pointing towards. Because keep in mind that Karma Kid feels this futility because what they're trying to tell you is, they say there's no point, but what they're really trying to tell you is, I've got contracts here that say I can't go there. I can't remember. I can't talk about it. I can't do this. Like, whatever those contracts are, hopelessness exists in our system because of contracts, because people told us there were things we could not do. And when we start doing them, Karma Kid starts hitting us with the futility because we are not allowed to break that contract, right? So that's really important for us to get when the futility comes in. That part is saying, we don't go here, right? Now, again, we can write from the futility and we can go there, but that's a process. Carol is saying, my controller already told me there is no anger there, but my stomach is hurting. Yeah, controllers don't tell a lot of truth, unfortunately. And so I would say there's anger there. And I'll be honest, I don't talk about this idea too much because it sounds so simplified. And I'm not here to stereotype survivors, but I have this phrase that I sometimes use with my clients, which is, there are two types of trauma survivors. Of course, there's way more than that. But there are those who embrace their futility, and there are those who embrace their anger. And don't get me wrong, there's a whole spectrum in between, right? I'm just trying to simplify the concept so I can explain it, right? And by embrace, I mean, that's just their go-to emotion. It's not like they're really excited about it, but they just have an emotion that they're more likely to feel. What that often means then is that the other emotion is absolutely unacceptable. And so for every one of us, there's usually like for me, for example, I'll just say that I really embraced my anger very early on. It was one of the first things that I found in my system, and I wrote 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 from my rage. I don't even know how many pages, so many pages, before I started to connect with anything else in my system. For other people, futility is more of the go-to defensive emotion, and the other one is highly blocked. So the controller is the one that usually feels the fear around the other emotion, but again, so can that part that holds that other emotion. So for example, the Karma Kid holds futility, the Mean Kid holds anger. They will fear each other's emotions. But the controller is the primary fear here. And their fear will show up as, I don't have that. Absolutely. That's exactly what the controller will say. They will say, I don't have that. I have some hopelessness. Okay, whatever. I'll admit it, but I don't have that other emotion you're talking about. A lot of times we hear people who are really, really prone to depression will be like, I'm not angry. I have no anger. And I'm like, oh, but you do, right? But the controller is like, I don't have that. I don't have that. And for those of us who are prone to anger, which was my sort of side of the coin with a lot of anxiety, my controller was like, there is no futility here, and we do not want it. It will never show up. No. Until, of course, it did. And it was big, and I still to this day hate it. But it has been a massive healing point for me to address my futility and let it express itself. So if you know you tend to block one, you want to be writing from your fear of that. And yes, writing from that doesn't exist is actually writing from the fear of that. It's the controller story sitting over top of that fear, right? So yes, thank you for that question. It's a great one. All right, so Faye is saying, the Karma Kid I learned from you. She comes up when I do something for me or try to. I know she's coming, and I understand she's trying to protect me. So this is a great comment. to make, because yes, the Karma Kid, like what you're talking about here is a contract, right? So the Karma Kid is saying you're not allowed to do something for yourself. You're not allowed to even try to do something for yourself. And it is actually very, very helpful to know the Karma Kid is coming, because I'll be honest, for the Karma Kid and their heavy futility and shame, the element of surprise can really knock us down, and it can keep us from doing the thing the Karma Kid thinks is really, really bad idea. And again, these usually are around contracts. So in your case, contract. Don't do anything nice for yourself. Don't do anything for you. You're not allowed. You know, Karma Kids love to use words like selfish when it comes to these kind of contracts. Or like what Carol was talking about, Karma Kid coming up and saying you're not allowed to feel those emotions, or you're not allowed to know what's on the other side of those emotions. You know, you're not allowed to find that memory. These are all different contracts that we often make with people from our childhoods. And the Karma Kid shows up to kind of get us with that futility so that we don't go doing anything crazy, right? That's the idea here. Don't go breaking that contract. That's really what's happening there. So, let's see. Shabnam is saying, is a prompt for anger, I'm angry because, or is there a better one? Exposing how little anger and writing I'm writing from. Yeah, I understand. My dreams are playing out previous abuse scenarios, and I'm angry in them, especially in the mornings. Okay, so yeah, so your dreams are saying, hey, Shabnam, you're angry, right? That's what it's telling you, and that's your dreams are probably being informed largely by the angry parts. The mean kid and the freedom fighters are our primary angry parts. So, I am angry because is not the best writing prompt for anger, because it's more writing about the emotion than writing from the emotion. However, I'm really glad you brought that up, because most people would write from I am angry because. Most people don't recognize this idea that I talk about in emotional journaling, where we're actually writing from the emotion in first person, okay? That's really hard to do, especially when the controller doesn't like anger. So again, sometimes the best place to start is with the controller's fear of the anger. For example, there's no anger here, like we talked about with Carol, or it's a bad idea, don't go here, you'll turn into a monster, you'll be horrible forever if you're angry. All of these different fears that show up around anger are a good writing prompt that may be blocking anger, okay? But then on the other side of that is writing from the anger itself. And I often say to my clients with anger, it can be good to write in a letter form. So if you're angry at a person, write to them. Like, I hate you because. Okay, like that is getting us a little closer to the actual emotional expression, right? So that can be a good way to start emotional journaling from anger and rage. Eventually, the goal may be to just sit down and write like from the anger in general, like, but I do think that a great way to start is maybe try some letters, like write some letters to the people you're angry about. These are not we're not sending these letters. I know most of you know that, but since I'm online right now, I kind of want to say that out loud. They're just letters we're writing in our journal to express the anger and let it say what it needs to say. So that's what I have for you guys today. Thank you so much for coming in and saving me from myself, because I didn't have the chance to do it out loud, and asking these great questions. This was fantastic. I do love doing Q&As. I don't do enough of them. And so I do appreciate all of your time today and your input and your thoughts and all of your questions. And I look forward to talking to you next Tuesday, when I will probably be a bit more prepared for our live stream and have an outline or a subject matter at the very least. So thank you all so much. And just so you know, for those of you still hanging on, Janet Lansbury and I did another podcast. If you happen to be a parent and you're really interested in parenting podcasts, that's going to come out today. So I'm really excited about that. I will share it when it comes out as well. I love working with her so much, and so that'll be really, really fun to listen to also. So thank you all so much, and I look forward to talking to you next Tuesday.